And the Organization for Refugee and Immigrant Success, I'll abbreviate it to ORIS, is located in Manchester, New Hampshire. We're committed to aiding in the resettlement of refugee and immigrant groups in the state by providing assistance, training, resources, and opportunities that promote self-sufficiency. ORIS has been successfully administering the New American Sustainable Agriculture Project in New Hampshire since 2008, when we started with 15 Somali Bantu refugees. And this year, in 2012, we have 40 farmers from Somalia, Bhutan, Congo, Rwanda, and Burundi. So we're growing. The brand under which all of our farmers are selling their produce is called Fresh Start Farms. We use it as a brand so that farmers are protected with product liability insurance. We also do the billing for our CSA customers and our wholesale customers, and we pay the farmers directly. When accessing institutional markets, we decided that first we needed a food safety plan for our incubator farm sites. And the first key thing we needed was a source of clean water. The farm had no water, and a wash station so that we could meet the minimum of standards when delivering produce. So developing a food safety plan, you might want to review the needs of your farm. Every farm has different needs and is at a different point. But that was our first strategy, was to develop the plan and figure out what infrastructures and supplies were necessary to implement the plan. We also provide training and technical assistance to the farmers so that they understand what a food safety plan means and how to implement it. We provide training and workshops in the wintertime to discuss farm and food safety. And we also provide assistance on the site from the time the ground is being planted throughout the season and up through point of sale to help farmers meet at least the minimum of food safety standards. We've also, in the wintertime, work with NRCS in their EQIP program so that we could leverage money for a well to develop a source of water for irrigation and for washing our vegetables. Our next strategy out of 3 that I've identified for today's webinar is to have staff initiate the contacts with wholesale buyers on behalf of Fresh Start Farms. And what we've decided we would start with was to meet face-to-face with wholesale buyers with a price list that had seasonal availability. Developing relationships can be challenging, and a lot of it has to do with matching a product with the customer and timing the crops to their needs. So it's really essential to make sure that the wholesale list has seasonal availability. And a lot of times we'll leave a folder with the wholesale buyer and discuss any of their food safety requirements, their ordering and delivery protocols, and then following up with them when the crops come close to being ready to harvest. For this group of incubator farmers, we've focused on bumper crops because you're guaranteed to have large quantities on the farm. And this is good for farmers who might not plan in advance for wholesale, because small-scale growers might not be attracted to the lower prices that wholesale brings. But when direct markets cannot move the high volume generated by these crops, the farmers have always been more than happy to have wholesale markets for these crops. And the final strategy that Fresh Start Farms is using to access institutional markets is, once we have an order, is to identify which farmers have the product available and then walk with them through the fields as they're harvesting and doing the washing and the packing, right up through invoicing and even delivery, at least for the first delivery. We find that farmers require at least some help and guidance with packaging standards and also with sourcing packaging materials. So our program has sourced the wax bushel and an eighth boxes and the tomato boxes to help the farmers because it can be expensive and difficult to source these items. One of the challenges, one of the reasons why we set up the accounts is that language barriers between immigrant and refugee farmers and the customer can be quite an obstacle at the beginning, but once we develop accounts and relationships, the farmers create their own relationships and these will be their customers, and we can continue to develop accounts and build capacity for Fresh Start Farms as a whole. And we really want to make sure that it's an enterprise that's profitable. So again, we focus on the bumper crops. And we also focus on selling to institutions that share similar values and willingness to buy local. So we found some colleges, some local grocers, not large chain grocery store, but some smaller grocers. And through Southern New Hampshire Services, our fiscal agent, they also provide the Summer Food Service Program and the Commodity Supplemental Foods Program. Both are USDA outlets of food for low-income clients, and we've been sourcing food for both programs. One of the bigger challenges with working with other food buyers has been competing with other larger farms or larger wholesalers on price points. We also don't work with restaurants. We find that they buy in smaller quantities and have more specific needs rather than just some of the bumper crops. But we have found that restaurants are attending our local farmers market and are buying and finding what they need from Fresh Start Farms at the farmers market. So for groups who are working with immigrant farmers and are looking to access institutional markets, I put together a list of recommendations and kind of in an order of how you might want to tackle each issue. But the first thing would be to provide the liability insurance, and the way to do that would be under a collective market brand such as Fresh Start Farms. Making sure your farm has enough clean water and an adequate washing station. Anticipating the wholesaling of bumper crops and developing price lists accordingly. Contact institutions who are looking to purchase local and who are willing to work with through some food safety issues. Sourcing the wholesale packaging supplies, providing technical assistance to the farmers up through the point of sale, making sure that they're meeting the food safety requirements, and then over time transferring accounts to the individual growers directly to build the capacity of all the growers under the collective market brand. So that is all that I had today, and I thank you. My also advice is to start small and develop accounts as you can manage them. It's important to keep customers happy and build on a good reputation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Our next speaker is Daniel Unger, and also want to remind folks that if you have not yet plugged in your audio pin, make sure you do that so that we can see you in the attendee list and know how many folks and who you are if you're on the webinar. The audio pin is in the audio section of your GoToWebinar control panel. If you just click on the triangle next to the word audio, it'll open up that box and it'll show you your audio pin. So please be sure to enter that if you have not entered it. And then also under the questions segment of your control panel is where you can type in questions at any time during any of the presentations that you would like to have answered at the end of the webinar. So please feel free to type those in at any time. So next we're going to switch over to Daniel's screen so that he can share his presentation with us.
Okay, thank you, and welcome everyone. I'll just look for a note in the chat box if no one can hear me, or if you're having trouble hearing me. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and get started. As Kristen said, my name is Daniel Unger, and I'm with Cultivating Community. We work on several different programs related to food access and community food systems. In addition to refugee farmer training, we also run youth programs in the summer and year-round. And we also work on food access in the neighborhoods that we work in. So I'll be speaking today specifically about working with refugee farmers. And one thing that follows really well following Andrea's presentation is that her program was modeled closely after ours in Maine. And so she provided a very good overview for how we operate as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about our efforts to meet more stringent food safety requirements and some of the challenges that we faced. So once again, New American Sustainable Agriculture Project, we provide training and support to 25 to 30 participants per year. Most of our participants are Somali Bantu. We work with smaller numbers of Sudanese and Latin American participants. And most importantly for this topic of meeting food safety requirements, kind of the most important aspects of our population are that we work with a group with very low literacy, very low household income. All of the participants in our program work on an incubator farm site that we manage with plots ranging from a 1/4 acre to 1 acre. And our program, in addition to providing training, coordinates marketing opportunities, CSA, and wholesale, very much along the same model that Andrea talked about. So why are we interested in institutional markets that we might be able to access if we can meet food safety requirements? Like a lot of small farmers in a lot of areas in the country, there's a sense that there's a market saturation with direct markets, that there's already a lot of small vegetable farmers at farmers markets. There's a lot of CSAs out there, and that greatest opportunity to expand the local food aspect of the food system is in wholesale. As one example, there was a hospital in Maine that had a grant for $90,000 to purchase local foods. By their own analysis, they found they could only find enough producers to utilize 10% of those funds. And there were different reasons for that. Some of it was because of the prices that they were willing and able to pay. But a significant reason was that there weren't enough GAP-certified farmers and producers out there that they could work with. So there's definitely an opportunity and a challenge in the producers being ready to meet the food safety requirements. We're also interested in institutional markets because from a training point of view, if some of our participants could simplify their production systems so that they didn't have to grow so many different vegetables, but could grow fewer crops for larger markets, it could be a simpler model for them to adapt as they learn how to farm and access markets in a new country. So this photograph is of a woman named Habiba Noor, and this is a typical bumper crop, just like Andrea mentioned, of tomatoes, and farmers having far too much of a crop and looking for ways to sell it. So that, that's really where we approach trying to find institutional markets. I'm going to talk just one slide about insurance and what we do, and then I'll spend the rest of my time talking about food safety. Our organization has a $1 million liability insurance policy, and that covers everything that a typical nonprofit policy would cover, as well as the farm produce that comes off the farm and our participants' presence at farmers markets. So if a farmers market requires proof of insurance, then our insurance company will provide riders that we provide to each farmers market association where our farmers attend. People have questions specifically about insurance, we can talk about that later. But I'll talk about food safety and specifically some of the barriers faced by trying to implement GAP standards and just a broader criticism of food safety policy. When GAP was first introduced, there were quite a wave of criticism about how it would work with smaller farmers. I'll just read a few of these quotes. The first one is from Steve Gilman with the Northeast Organic Farming Association. he wrote that GAP certification comes at a price, and widespread adoption would present significant barriers for diversified small-scale and organic growers looking to supply school lunch programs, their local universities, supermarkets, or larger wholesale markets. Jumping ahead to the last quote here, Russell Libby, the director of MAFCA, pointed out that while marketing agreements such as GAP are typically voluntary, the standards that are contained with them often become the de facto floor within the related industry. So there was a major concern that some of these food safety requirements would be so strict as to not be very accessible to small-scale producers. And our feeling has been that if that's true, it's disproportionately true for limited resource producers who have fewer sources of funding and less access to some of the information to how they could overcome these barriers. And in the words of one colleague that also worked on a refugee incubator farm site, they felt that their incubator farm site was just not GAPable. In other words, that some of those GAP requirements were too strict for what they were trying to do with their demographics. The good news is that many organizations have recognized that GAP does impose a lot of limitations and have come up with alternatives. One example is the GAP program in Rhode Island, and there was a presentation on that as part of this Learning Community series as an example of a program that has tried to be responsive to the challenges that farmers see and has tried to be more flexible. Here locally, two examples that I'm going to talk about are Portland Public Schools and the Maine General Hospital System. They basically developed their own food safety checklist, and they found that they trusted they'd be sufficient for them, but they'd be less stringent than GAP. And so that's been very encouraging for us, and we feel like that's the way forward. But we still have some challenges for meeting the requirements of these institutions, and so I'll talk about those next. In a couple different categories that overlap. Some are challenges that we face specifically because we are an incubator farm site with multiple producers. Some challenges that are faced specifically by our demographic of immigrants and refugees, and then just some challenges kind of inherent to this model. So first of all, challenges specific to a farm incubator operation. One is our wash station. It gets very heavy use. We have participants who go to market 7 days a week. So there are many users in there, including extended families, sometimes people who are in there rarely, but maybe around one day to help a family member who's in our program. We have, I think, 7 or 8 different farmers who go to Saturday farmers markets. So on a Friday evening, we have 8 different farms using our wash station, and they may have family members helping them. So there might be 25 or more people trying to use our wash station on a Friday evening. So as you might be able to imagine, trash becomes a problem, partly because no one wants to clean up someone else's mess. It's a little bit like the experience of the kitchen sink when you've got a lot of roommates. No one wants to wash the other person's dishes, so they just pile up, even if it would just take a minute. So trash, it's harder to manage when you have so many multiple users. And one of the risks is that if one person violates some of our site use agreements, such as trash, it potentially could impact any of the producers using that site. It's not always clear to us, if we find some litter, where that came from, but it potentially impacts everyone, even if there's just one person that may be the source of the problem. Now, some challenges specific to our demographic of socially disadvantaged and limited resource producers with meeting food safety requirements. One is that one that Andrea touched on, was the cost of new supplies to implement some of these requirements. So it's more difficult for limited resource producers to purchase new equipment or supplies before they even have a guarantee that there's going to be increased income as a result. So one example would be harvest containers. And producers that are in our program tend to use a range of salvage materials. You can see some of the many different containers that are in the background of this picture. Usually it would make sense to standardize all your containers if you're going to try to meet some food safety requirements. It's much more expensive. Those containers can be $12 to $15 a piece versus picking up materials that are left over from a nursery or from a other business. That's one example. Another major challenge is with record keeping. A lot of food safety requirements want to see a record for, an example of Portland Public Schools, records of all harvested crops, the date they were harvested, the precise location, and the amount. And that is far more records than most of the refugee farmers with limited literacy in our program are taking. They do keep some records of their income and their expenses, but they certainly don't catalog everything that they harvest and where in the field it came from. Then there are some challenges that are still kind of unclear or otherwise burdensome. And here are a few examples. We have this checklist from Portland Public Schools. One of their questions is the transportation vehicle clean? Well, in our case, the farmers tend to use minivans for transportation. And so how clean does clean have to be? And the vegetables are moving in and out of there several days a week. It's not also always clear that the institution may know what they're looking for, that they may not have the same depth of documentation that federal GAP standards do. So it can be hard for us to know whether our vehicles would be considered clean enough. Another example, are measures being taken to prevent livestock or wildlife from entering fields? Well, is this institution hoping that the fields are fenced, or what are they really looking for? It isn't always clear. Then there are some requirements that are actually quite challenging, even though they are logical as well. One example is a requirement for single-use towels at our hand wash station. And I gave that example specifically because it seems simple, easy. It's definitely common sense from a hygiene point of view. But if you can imagine our farm site, which has very little infrastructure, we do have a hand wash sink, but it's really just a sink right next to our harvest station. If you're talking about single-use towels, you're actually talking about, well, what kind of building or container would there be that it's easy to store those, that they stay dry in all kinds of weather? How do they get disposed of? Again, we just have a sink with a soap dispenser. So it's actually fairly complicated to figure out how to implement that. We're certainly talking about building something that becomes a place where you wash your hands. And if you think about disadvantaged and limited resource farmers that are sometimes just leasing a field and have almost no infrastructure out there, figuring out how they would wash their hands when all they maybe have is a very basic wash station, and what other infrastructure do they need just to have these towels that you can imagine would be in a restroom. It gets surprisingly complicated when a farm might not have more than a field and a couple of hand wash stations. So those are some of the challenges that we face, and some of the strategies that I wanted to touch on that we have used. One is that we have a required and clear site use agreement for all program participants. In our program, we incorporate those requirements into our training so that participants are also learning the intent and the importance of the rules so that they don't seem arbitrary, because there are a lot of cultural norms behind these rules, and people understand the significance of them, both for accessing markets and also from a health and hygiene point of view. We discuss our policies with farmers as much as possible, and we make sure that participants understand some of these challenges of accessing institutional markets so that they're part of the solution as we look for systemic ways to address them. So again, in our program, we have a farmer committee that's involved in farm management decisions. They have recently decided that they want to purchase a rubberized floor for our harvest and wash station, which will cost close to $1,000, but it should be much easier to keep clean. And with so many users, it feels like it'll be worth the investment. Some other effective strategies, and so as I mentioned, it's very encouraging that different institutions are coming up with their own requirements that are easier to work with, but they're not universal, and the challenge is that it's not always clear what that means, that the vehicle is clean and so on. So it really becomes about positive relationships with the buyer where you can develop trust, that you can come up with record keeping that all sides can agree with, and that for any of those policies that are unclear, that it becomes an opportunity to clarify standards. As an example, we were able to sell 100 pounds of garlic scapes and 1,000 pounds of onions to Portland Public Schools this season. So even though we had some of these rules that weren't totally clear to us and some that were still challenging, Portland Public Schools was willing to work with us, and we had good personal relationships. So we're still moving forward. In other words, these criteria aren't so strict that everything is on hold until we can figure them all out. One of the challenges of that is that we're not a neutral third party if we're negotiating for more flexible requirements. So there has to be trust that we're not trying to kind of be sneaky or hide something about safety and hygiene on the farm, that we're sort of bringing up legitimate roadblocks and issues that might be hard for us to implement, and that we are taking other food safety basics about keeping the area clean and sanitized, and that the water is clean, that we're taking those seriously. That's all I've got, and can take questions at the end, so thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And again, if you do have questions, you can start typing them into the questions box under the GoToWebinar control panel at any time, and we'll answer those at the end. And also, if you have not yet punched in your audio pin on your phone, please do so. Please do that now. That is under the audio portion of the GoToWebinar control panel. So now we are going to switch over to Jennifer Hashley, who's next on the agenda. So I'm going to do the switch here.
Great. Is my screen showing now?
Yep, looks great.
All right, so thank you, Kristen, and thanks, Daniel and Andrea. This has been a great presentation so far. So I'm from the New Entry Sustainable Farming Project in Massachusetts, and let me see how I advance the slide here. I'll go to the next page. Our service area in Massachusetts is in the northeast corner of the state, and we have several incubator training farm sites, and we also operate an aggregation and distribution center for produce for the farmers. What isn't totally represented here on this map, though, is we've graduated a lot of the immigrant and refugee farmers who've worked in our project over the years. So we have now about 30 different farmers contributing into our food hub that are scattered throughout the northeastern portion of Massachusetts, which will have some significance as I move forward in our discussion about we're not sort of all on one site or even our several incubator sites anymore, but as our farmers have moved on to their own farms, that's created some additional challenges for keeping tabs on food safety and the infrastructure requirements around that. But basically, just a little bit about New Entry and what we do. Our mission really is to help develop comprehensive strategies to assist limited resource producers to begin to successfully farm in Massachusetts in order to support the region's agriculture, build long-term economic self-reliance among participants, and to provide access to high-quality foods in underserved areas through growing it locally here in our community. And we serve a diverse range of growers coming from all different backgrounds. From 1998 through 2007, we worked exclusively with immigrants and refugees who had farming backgrounds, and in 2007, we opened our program to all beginning farmers. So it's really diversified over the years. We have folks that are young people, retirees, career changers across the board from all different cultures, and we're seeing more and more women getting involved in the program, and a lot of different enterprise interests. So we don't only do vegetables, but we also have a large livestock training component, and we've had folks interested in aquaculture and value-added food businesses and other things that come through our courses and programs. So we serve a large range of interests as well. Our program goals are really to help people remove the barriers into entry to farming by providing training and education, access to land, capital markets, help build their farming experience, and develop a network of beginning farmers in a community that they can rely on and provide support to as they work and contribute to the local food system. We're also really interested in keeping farmland in production so that we have future farmers. We do a land matching program, and we always seem to have more available land than farmers who are ready and able to farm it. So we're trying to keep the pipeline of new farmers going for future generations. And really, the core of our work, I like to show here in this Venn diagram, is at the intersection of the producers that we work with most intensely in all of those different segments, both helping them get access to the training they need, the land that they need, and the markets that they need to develop all of those components together to be successful. So this is a very messy picture of a lot of the different programs and services, both of the food system as a whole and then the activities in orange that we focus on to help build farmer capacity and their skills and develop successful small businesses in order to increase the number of farmers. So some of the areas that we focus on at the top are really the market access piece and all the different service providers that they may come into contact with other than ourselves, the training components and the land components. So that's kind of how we see all the different pieces fitting together in order to help farmers be successful. So the core of how people get involved in our program is really through the Farm Business Planning course. And through this project focusing on food safety, we've included as part of our Farm Business Planning course that producers coming through that and developing their farm business plan need to also, in addition to their marketing plan, production plan, financial management plan, risk management plan, also need to include a food safety plan from the very beginning so that they're establishing an understanding of the requirements of dealing with that aspect if they're going to be selling to either direct markets or institutional markets, that that's something that more and more people care about and they should incorporate right from the very beginning. And then as I mentioned, we have an incubator farm program. We have 2 different sites that we're actively using this year. The third site is in transition away from that site, but each of our sites come with a lot of the infrastructure needed to begin farming. They do have wash stations. We have 1 cooler that folks can access. It comes with small equipment storage, and they're shared by multiple farmers, similar to the other programs that we heard from earlier. And then we do provide a lot of ongoing technical assistance and have field-based trainings throughout the season. We do about a dozen on-site trainings, and 2 of those are related. One is around food safety, and the other is around post-harvest handling. So those are hands-on components in addition to the other trainings on irrigation and pest management and small equipment use and all kinds of other practical skills topics. But those are the 2 areas most related to that. And I did want to mention about insurance requirements. Each of our farmers who are leasing land at our incubator sites are required to carry their own liability insurance policy for the incubator sites, and that also is a way for them to get their own insurance coverage for when they sell at their own direct markets outside of that. Our organization does provide other liability protection when they sell through our food hub, the World Peace Collaborative, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then we do offer a lot of external market connections and support services to help farmers get access to farmers markets, to accept coupon programs or SNAP benefits at markets, to develop signage and figure out the displays and materials and cooking information to give to their customers, and all, find the packaging. And we do bulk orders for supplies for farmers, as many of the other programs mentioned today, and to help farmers get access to their own markets. But we found over the years that, like Andrea was mentioning with the bumper crops, that not everyone has the skills and capacity or time to develop their own markets effectively. So we also, in 2005, developed the World Peas Food Hub. And so that is our centralized brand for marketing, aggregating, and distributing. So we started that program as a way to help the farmers access other markets outside of what they could do on their own. And we started very small. In the initial beginning phases of this program, we started doing some wholesaling to Whole Foods. Back in 2005, when they were very interested and still are in buying locally, we started it with a 15-member CSA, and we're doing several farmers markets on a cooperative basis. And over the years, this is a very interactive development process with the farmers, focused really on the CSA, as many of the farmers felt like they could access wholesale markets to some degree and do their own farmers markets on their own. So we really concentrated on the community-supported agriculture program, and at this point we've evolved it into a 500-plus family member CSA program serving 23 different distribution sites around Greater Boston. And with increasing aggregation and distribution capacity, we've also been able to seamlessly add other marketing outlets kind of behind the scenes, so it doesn't seem, the farmer doesn't necessarily know that their product, it's going to the CSA, but it could also be going to Tufts Dining. It goes to the WIC office. It may go to the summer feeding program. It may go to other low-income food distribution programs that we're also partnering with behind the scenes. So they know that in theory, but they may not know on a particular day that their tomatoes are going to Tufts versus a CSA drop-off or a summer feeding distribution site. So we do all of that on the back end to help them do that. So that's where we are looking to expand into more institutional sales. Just the Tufts Dining and some of the USDA summer feeding programs and things like that are the most institutions that we have expanded to at this point until we can continue to improve our global food safety training program, which is the point of this grant that we're working on. And so we've partnered together with MAFCA and Community Food Security Coalition in this project, and part of what we wanted to accomplish were these 4 key areas. We wanted to do some assessment and research to figure out if we're going to have more of a concerted effort toward the practical on-farm practical skills, sort of behavior change components of how farmers are doing things in order to comply with a lot of the requirements and gaps and the institutional buyer checklists and things that are important. What are the existing curriculum and resource materials that are already out there, and are they applicable to the scale and scope of farming that our farmers are working under? We sent several staff to UMass Extension supported GAPS trainings and other on-farm food safety programming so that we could be better knowledgeable about what is out there and how to effectively get the information to farmers. And then we wanted to do a survey of sort of what is actually going on other area small farms to figure out, are there good models that are already out there, people kind of figuring it out already with low-cost setups on their farms. So we visited several farms in the area to kind of do a baseline of what people thought about food safety and insurance requirements, and realized, I'll have a photo on the next slide, that there weren't a lot of great models out there. So we looked around for some and ended up building a model wash station as a sample for, we wrote up the budgets and the materials costs and things to share with farmers as part of that. As part of that as well, we developed training materials. As I said, we incorporated the food safety plan into our farm business planning course and our field trainings. We gave a conference presentation at our regional Northeast Organic Farming Association, and we've developed a bunch of quick guides and plain language resources that will be available on the website. And then we've done, as part of that, moved more toward this summer into the on-farm technical assistance and training with our farms that have, a lot of them who have graduated off the incubator sites and are on new land. 4 of our farmers are on new sites this year, so we really had to kind of figure out what they were working with or not working with to see how we could move them further along to compliance. And so we're in the process now of getting the site visits completed and developing a future where we go from here kind of compliance plan and audit that we'll be developing as we move forward this winter in collaboration with the farmers and get their input into that. So during our research and assessment phase, here's kind of what we saw out there in the field. Seems potentially, I would assume, maybe fairly typical of what many of you have seen on farms. A lot of Rubbermaid bulk tanks used as wash tubs, different crates and things. Of this one farm on the upper left here at least had some more standardized equipment, but just a lot of buckets and different things cobbled together here. I used boat as a drainage rack. We saw all kinds of interesting ways that farmers were setting up their wash stations and things. So looking at kind of the situation of that, realizing that people are in a lot of the same boats. So when we decided to build kind of a model station, we wanted something that was affordable and potentially feasible for farmers to consider, but could see how it worked, see how much it cost to build, and have that resource. So we found a good example through the Leopold Center at Iowa State University. They'd done a similar project looking at ideal wash stations, and this particular wash station was supposedly available to be built for less than $1,200, and that was about what it came in at in terms of supplies, labor certainly in addition to that. But the design of the system, it's under shelter, and it has a process flow according to some of the requirements of how you want to bring the produce in and out of the system. And there's a dedicated hand wash sink on the right with a paper towel dispenser underneath so it doesn't get wet. So that's kind of what we've worked with. We've built one. Now that the farmers have used it for a season, there are some tweaks that they would like to make in terms of process flow for how it actually works on the farm. So we're in the process this fall of building a second station at our other training site with hopefully some improvements, and we'll continue to put those resources and make them available as we build that one as well. So as I said, part of the education of the producers that we do, which is ongoing, we have an annual winter meeting for our World Peas Food Hub where we go over all of the financials, the market access, the kind of logistical efficiencies and communication, and get feedback from the farmers. One of the key items that we made a decision about this year for many reasons, one of them being food safety, was that we did move to a standardized crate system. As Daniel mentioned, it was an expensive investment. The farmers agreed that it would be a good one to make, because when we're dealing with 36 different farmers dropping off produce 3 days a week in all kinds of bushel baskets and crates and boxes and buckets and anything and everything, it created a nightmare both in terms of cooler storage space in knowing what was in what, and then once we emptied all of those containers into the boxes to go out to the CSA shares, we were left with a mess of things that didn't stack or nest or couldn't put anywhere, which creates all kinds of contamination issues, as you can imagine, just being kind of left out helter-skelter. So during those meetings, we kind of do some problem solving and figure out what the training needs are in terms of production and crops and kind of logistics and handling and post-harvest management, so that we can also have a really high-quality product for consumers. As I mentioned, we do our field trainings using the wash station as kind of an example to talk about what works and what doesn't. The picture in the upper right was one of our farmers. This is at the site where we'd like to build a second wash station. This is kind of a makeshift pavilion that we had built for another purpose that has become a de facto wash station area because it does have a cover over it. And this is one of our new incubator farmers this year who on our recent farm tour was kind of gave an impromptu post-harvest handling discussion to the attendees of our farm tour of what he had learned in the class. So that was a great testament to that people are actually implementing what we're teaching after they learn it. And then the bottom right is just sort of our packing protocol in our CSA distribution center, which has since moved from this photo out on the farm underneath an old circus tent into a real indoor packing and distribution facility where there's appropriate bathrooms and hand wash stations for the share packers, and we're under proper cover, so when it's raining and the tent's not leaking onto the produce, we're trying to also model practices that we want farmers to visit to implement on their farms as well. So some of our challenges for food safety compliance, many of them have been mentioned by Andrea and Daniel. One of the things that we're really seeing right now is the resources and just the capital needed and the priorities of where food safety sits for the farmers who are, if they're not on our incubator sites and don't have access to our potable water, well water, and a nice covered post-harvest washing station, that's one thing. So when they're transitioning off of the sites and leaving the incubator to new land, a lot of times, as Daniel mentioned, it's just land. It's a blank canvas. It's an open field. There's almost no infrastructure on many of the sites that we're placing farmers on. So, if they don't already have their own tillage equipment or an irrigation or a hoop house, they're kind of faced with all of these competing priorities for resources, and oftentimes just getting clean water to the site is a huge challenge. Many of our farmers, some of them do have clean tested water at their farms. Others are using untested surface water to irrigate, and that is something, even just getting through the testing requirements and helping them through technical assistance to figure out how to send a water sample to a lab and figure out if it's potable is a challenge. So then, then the next step is connecting them to, potentially EQIP programs or other cost share programs or capital to help them get appropriate water source. And then they may need a cooler, and the list goes on. And most folks are not thinking about their wash station as the first thing that they're going to invest in when they move to their new farm. So those are just some of the big picture challenges that we're dealing with as folks are just trying to get their land plowed and get a crop in the ground. And we have some farmers this year who are even bringing produce or water from their home out to the farm to wash their produce. So this is kind of just a quick little example. I'll call her Farmer Jane, not to use her real name in case it would embarrass her. But you know, this is a farmer who's come through our program many years, and this will be her 4th year on her. She came through the incubator program for 3 seasons, farmed in our new entry sites, and then we've helped transition her off to her own site. But every year for the last 4 years, she's been at a different farm site. For one reason or another, it didn't work out. So every year she's kind of starting over on new land. And this year she does have a longer term lease, but it doesn't have any potable water. So she, as pictured here, is hauling water from home to wash her vegetables in so that she knows that it is clean water. So that's not an ideal situation, but it is somewhat typical in the first year of a farmer being out on a new site. So we're spending a lot of time working with those farmers, just trying to help them figure out what they can do to improve those situations going forward, whether it's, as I said, accessing those cost share programs, or we're also contemplating putting together a funding program through the World Peace Food Hub, because we operate a successful CSA program and we get the capital from our customers up front at the start of the growing season. For many years we've been offering small advanced payments to the farmers to help them buy their seeds and startup costs at the beginning of the year. We've been talking with some microloan providers in the area who don't want to make 36 different small microloans, but would like to work through us as a conduit. And that's been an area we've been exploring with them. If they lend $20,000 to World Peas for then us to manage out to the farmers, could we give them a larger advance payment than we may be able to do on our own to help them invest in those on-farm infrastructure components to get them closer to being better in alignment with some of the food safety needs and other infrastructure needs that they may have. And so that's something that we're looking to do, hopefully plan to do over this coming winter. So to wrap up with some lessons and future strategies, some of the things that we're also needing to work on as we're looking to expand our institutional sales component, because we have a great partnership with Tufts Dining, because we are a Tufts program. They haven't necessarily enforced a lot of the same buyer standards that they may with their other suppliers, so we need to kind of dig a little bit deeper and see just what are they requiring of their other suppliers. We're also looking at a partnership with the Lowell Public School System, and they are a contracted food service company, and so they definitely have standards, and so we're working with them to get a clear understanding of what that might look like if we were to take on that role, and trying to figure out, working with the farmers this year, what changes might we need to make in terms of expectations, and is it implementable? Are they going to be able to actually succeed in doing that? And as I mentioned, kind of looking to develop some food safety funding for them to provide that capital and connect them to cost share programs to move along that continuum. And we'd like to set up a sort of our own mock audit system now that we sort of have a baseline and understand what we're working with in more detail, develop some follow-up technical assistance protocols, and try to tie that, incentivize that with sales, so that if farmers are making the investments in these food safety practices, can they be sort of the preferred vendors in terms of who we might work with first to expand some of the wholesale institutional markets that we'll be developing as we go forward, and then use sort of the mock audits and the ongoing technical assistance as communication tools to provide the technical assistance that they need, not to be sort of patronizing or come and slap people on the wrist, but just use it really as a chance to kind of help support them and point out ways that they could improve in terms of the action steps that they're doing on their farms. We already do, as I mentioned, require insurance certificates on the training farms. All the land matches that we've made on the landowners also require insurance certificates, so that will be ongoing, and then we'll continue our site visits as we move forward, which I think one-on-one site visits tend to be the best way to help farmers make real behavior change in terms of what they're doing, and follow up with them and make sure that they have the support that they need. So some of the food safety resources that we've developed as part of this project are shown here. We did 4 different quick guides to accessing farm insurance and what it is and how to get it, because we need to be able to refer people to get that often. We have a whole bibliography, a quick guide to food safety resources, all of the different training materials that are out there, and an overview of what's in them and what's great about them. a two-page fact sheet on the Food Safety Modernization Act and what that means for small farms, and then a quick guide, very short synopsis of what GAPs are, and then we have a whole plain language guide that's multiple pages with an example of the USDA audit verification checklist and a sample farm and food safety plan and the appendices there. So that's definitely a much longer document, but maybe made to kind of walk producers through all the different steps that are in there. And on the top right is our write-up about building the Leopold Center low-cost wash station and the design plans that we did, the modifications that we made in our budget to put that together. And Kristen will be posting all of those, I'm sure, on the food security website, which I hope I have listed the correct URL there, since you mentioned that it changed at the beginning. So my contact information is here, and I think we're going to be moving into questions and answers at this time. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And actually, yes, the URL did change. I'll just show that again, and I can also send it out again over email. So let me just get back over here to my screen, and we do have some time now for questions. So if you have any questions and you've not typed them in yet, please go to the questions section of your control panel and go ahead and type those in now. And I will display the I'll display my screen again here. Okay, so that's the URL site for the Community Food Security Coalition. It's a lot longer than it used to be for where we will be hosting all of the resources for this project. There's already a lot of information up there, and we will have additional information from New Entry and MOFGA posted there, as well as other related resources that people should find very useful. Let me take a look at our question list here. And yeah, the two questions I see here, I think actually it would be helpful for all of the presenters to answer. So just make sure all three of you are unmuted so you can each answer it maybe in the order that you spoke. The first question is, where did you get your initial land base for your program? So Andrea, and then Daniel, and then Jennifer. Do you want to answer that first question?
Sure. Our first incubator farm site was donated to us by a retired dairy farmer. They had a farm site where they had previously just grown cow corn for their dairy operation, and we put an ad out in, I think it was the Farm Bulletin or Small Farms Quarterly or something, and they had seen it, and they contacted us. And they've donated the land on a handshake for the past 3 years. And they've been very generous with tractor time and letting us put up a hoop house and put in a well, and they've just been very great. And then the second incubator site has been donated through a local college who had access to farmland.
This is Daniel, and in our case also it was a fairly individualized circumstance, and we lease our land directly from a farm owner who actually still lives on site, and the farm has been in their family for I think almost 200 years now. And we found that connection through we were basically just personal relationships when we were looking for land several years ago, and it was actually a recommendation made to us from a supporter of our program at the Maine Department of Ag. Prior to that, we had been at one or two other sites that ended up not working as well for us. Again, it was just networking and relationships. It wasn't a very, it wasn't that systematic, I guess you can say. It was a process based on just on that for reaching out to you.
Yep, and this is Jennifer with New Entry, and when we first started the program, it was a broad partnership project between a lot of different organizations, and we found the first land that we began on through the gentleman, John Oganowski, was a member of the Farm Service Agency County Committee, and so we were partners with Farm Service Agency, and he offered his land to make it available as well. He was also a member of the Dracut Land Trust in town. So we got our, the two current sites that we're operating on are owned by the Dracut Land Trust. We've since transitioned his farm property to the farmers who originally started farming there, so that's kind of become an independent site. And we found our third site that we used for about 7 years just through word of mouth in the community. Once we had established ourselves on some land in that town, it's a kind of a small town, and so other people were like, oh, I have 8 acres behind here that's not being used, and they were interested in seeing it continue to be farmed. So I think if you put the word out and word of mouth and can network a little bit, as everyone said, it's land will make itself available usually. We've found anyway. So it's just getting the infrastructure together and making sure you can get a longer term agreement in place so that when you do invest in the infrastructure, you know that you have control of the site for a while to make it worthwhile.
Thank you all so much for your insight on that. And another question for all three of you, and why don't we go in the same order again. How do you determine how to split the profits from a jointly owned farm among different farmers?
How do you split in order among farmers?
How do you determine how to split the profits from a jointly owned farm among different farmers? So in your situations, how do you split the profits amongst all the different farmers involved in your program?
Well, for the Fresh Start Farms New Hampshire, each farmer, they have their own site and they also keep their own profit. So for example, if we have a wholesale order, we would work with all the farmers who have the product available, and we would try and divide it up amongst them. And if someone had more than another and someone had a very little bit, it might differ in that way, but we try to be equitable and we invoice them for what they deliver. So every person keeps the money according to what they've grown and harvested and delivered. And that's more clear in like a farmer's market situation or the CSA. People might grow different products for the CSA. So it's tied directly to the individual.
And this is Daniel, and that's the same for us. So the Fresh Start Farms brand is not a collective in that sense, and every farmer is essentially operating their own micro business, and they're benefiting from that shared brand for the reasons that Andrea talked about, that it covers an insurance for them, and it provides marketing exposure and the associated market development work that we do. But when it comes down to their income, it's their own farm, it's their own product. So it doesn't go into any pool and then get redistributed. Everyone is paid specifically for either what they contribute to a CSA or wholesale very directly.
Yep, and this is Jennifer, and I would say the same. We're setting up independent agripreneurs on their own land, so each person has their own individual plot and they can market to whatever markets they develop. They're not obligated to sell to World Peas. It's an incentive. Many of them choose to, but they can sell anywhere, and whatever they keep is their own profit. When they do sell into World Peas, we establish a retail price for our CSA program, and farmers get paid 80% of that retail price. So we keep 20% for our own, to cover our own operating costs. And that commission, quote unquote, was something that the farmers voted on to decide what an appropriate percent commission was, because we are very transparent in how we run the CSA and the Food Hub program, and we have our annual meeting every year. We fully disclose the financials to all the farmers, and we say this is how much it costs us to run the program. This is what the prices are. This is what you're getting paid. Here's what we buy in from other suppliers. This is the potential money you could be making if you wanted to grow these crops. So it's all pretty much out in the air there. So the farmers really have control over sort of setting the prices, what they take, what needs to cover the cost of the operations, etc. So there's no real collective sharing going on. It's we pay for the crops that they deliver, and then they make their own decisions on where else they're marketing.
Great, thank you. And it looks like there's a couple more questions for you, Jennifer. The comment is, I love the wash stand design, but all that I have learned, RE produce safety, is that triple rinsing gives you the best reduction in pathogen load and extension of shelf life. Would you consider building a Model 3 sinks/tanks?
Sure, we could do that in the next iteration. Yeah, this one only has 2 sinks. So, I mean, there's the hand wash sink and then 2 additional rinse stations. Actually, the picture that I showed of the farmer holding up the wash tub at the second farm that we have now that hasn't gone through the process of having an official station built, there are 3 Rubbermaid tubs, and when he does his salad mix, he does a triple rinse and has found that it gives him a chance to pick out all the weeds as well, but he finds that it gives him a much better product to do initial rinse, secondary rinse, final rinse. So some of the farmers are already doing that on their own, and I think that is some of the feedback that we've gotten that the other site, it would be nice to add a 3rd sink. So we'll just have to either figure out how to squeeze it in or make it a lot longer. Makes the roof line interesting.
Thank you. And I don't see any other questions. Did any of the speakers have anything that you wanted to add?
I was just going to say we decided this year I didn't expand on it a lot, but to go to the standardized container crate situation, and it has been awesome. So I don't know if any of you all are considering that, but we decided and hemmed and hawed about it for many, many years because it is so expensive and we weren't sure how it was going to work. But basically, the only drawback is that the container size that we bought is a little bit small. So I wouldn't buy the same size that we bought again. But we ordered 300 of them, and we branded them all with a letter and a number. So each farmer gets assigned 10 or 20 crates at the beginning of the season, and then when they deliver their crops in only the standardized crates and put them in the cooler, they have to list on their invoice which bins, which crops are in, so that it also makes it so much easier for us to go into the cooler and pull orders based on bin number. And then we have volunteers who then can check in bins and check out bins. So, and things are just stay cleaner, the farmers can actually sanitize them, they stack, they nest. From a logistical perspective, it's been great.
And Andrea or Daniel, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think a lot's been covered. I think Jennifer and Daniel, you guys have answered a lot of my questions as well.
Yeah, and I would invite people to join us tomorrow if anyone is interested in having a longer discussion. There are just so many different ways to do this, and different kinds of opportunities that pop up from the different approaches that people take to serving this group and to managing incubator sites. And so it's always interesting to me to see what opportunities arise through slightly different angles of kind of work. So I welcome people to join us tomorrow.
And that is a great segue, Daniel. Thank you so much for reminding everyone about tomorrow's conference call. And also, after we hang up today, I am going to send you a link to a survey regarding today's webinar. And then probably tomorrow, or else very soon after tomorrow, I'll be sending you a link to a survey to evaluate the overall learning community. So, how did the learning community go for you in general in terms of the webinars you participated in and the conference calls and the resources you learned about and so forth. We really need your feedback on all of it. So please look for links to both of those surveys coming up today, tomorrow, or very soon. And thank you again to Andrea, Daniel, and Jennifer. And both Daniel and Jennifer will be able to join us on tomorrow's conference call. So please check in tomorrow so that we can discuss things in greater detail and process and digest what we've learned today and hear from all of you in terms of similar experiences you have had in working with producers on food safety and liability insurance issues. So thank you all so much, and have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.